Episode 3, The Secret Lighthouse by the Silent Sea. Part 1. The first light of dawn had not yet reached the horizon. The world was still wrapped in soft shades of blue and silver. A cool breeze drifted through the open window of Ethan's bedroom, carrying with it a scent he had never noticed before. It was different from the fresh pine forests, different from the whispering river. It smelled of salt, of distant waves, and of endless horizons. Ethan slowly opened his eyes. For a moment, he lay quietly beneath his warm blanket, listening. Somewhere far away, he could hear the gentle rhythm of the sea. Not loud, not wild, just soft waves rolling onto a quiet shore. He smiled. His grandmother had told him that beyond the green valleys and forests, there was a peaceful coastline where an old lighthouse stood alone above the cliffs. Few people visited it. Those who did always returned with calm hearts and beautiful memories. After breakfast, Ethan packed his little brown backpack. Inside were his notebook, the 3 smooth river stones Samuel had given him, a bottle of fresh water, and a small piece of homemade bread. His grandmother handed him a warm scarf. "The sea breeze is gentle," she said with a smile, "but it can be cool in the morning." Ethan thanked her. Before leaving, he looked once toward the forest beyond the farmhouse. Somewhere behind those trees flowed the whispering river. Somewhere beside it stood Samuel's little cabin. He smiled softly. Beautiful places never truly leave us. They simply become part of our hearts. The narrow country road stretched toward the eastern coast. Golden wheat fields swayed gently in the breeze. Wildflowers danced beside the path. Above him, white clouds floated slowly across the brightening sky. Birds greeted the morning with cheerful songs. After a long, peaceful walk, Ethan reached the top of a grassy hill. He stopped. Far in the distance, where the blue sky met the endless ocean, stood a tall white lighthouse. Its light had already gone out with the coming of morning, yet it stood proudly above the rocky cliffs, quietly watching over the sea. The waves sparkled beneath the rising sun. Seagulls circled gracefully overhead. The salty breeze gently touched Ethan's face. He took one slow breath, then another. Somehow, he felt that the lighthouse had been waiting for him, with calm footsteps and a heart full of quiet curiosity. Ethan began walking toward the peaceful sea. Episode 3, The Secret Lighthouse by the Silent Sea. Part 2. The narrow path slowly led Ethan toward the coastline. With every step, the sound of the sea became a little clearer. Gentle waves rolled onto the sandy shore with a slow, peaceful rhythm. Wash, pause, wash, pause. The sound was soft and comforting, like a quiet heartbeat. The morning breeze carried the salty scent of the ocean across the grassy cliffs. Tiny white wildflowers swayed gently beside the path. Above, a few seagulls glided effortlessly through the brightening sky. Their graceful wings hardly seemed to move. They simply floated upon the wind. Ethan paused for a moment to watch them. "They make flying look so peaceful," he whispered to himself. Soon, he reached the top of the coastal cliffs. The view took his breath away. The ocean stretched as far as he could see. Its calm blue surface sparkled beneath the rising sun. Far below, gentle waves kissed the rocks before quietly returning to the sea. The old lighthouse stood proudly at the edge of the cliff. Its white walls glowed softly in the golden morning light. The red roof looked bright against the endless blue sky. A narrow stone path led from the cliff to the lighthouse. It curved gently through patches of wild grass and colorful coastal flowers. Ethan began walking toward it. The breeze became cooler. It gently brushed against his face and carried the distant cries of the seagulls. As he drew closer, he noticed small details he had not seen from far away. The lighthouse door was painted a deep navy blue. The windows reflected the sparkling sea. An old brass lantern hung beside the entrance, polished until it shone like gold. Near the lighthouse stood a weathered wooden bench facing the ocean. Someone had placed a small clay pot filled with blooming white daisies beside it. Everything felt simple. Everything felt cared for. A tiny seashell rested on the bench. Ethan picked it up carefully. He held it close to his ear. For a moment, it almost sounded as though the sea itself was whispering inside the shell. He smiled. Perhaps every shell carried a little memory of the ocean. A gentle breeze rustled the tall grass around the lighthouse. The sound blended perfectly with the rolling waves below. No cars, no crowds, only the sea, the wind, and the peaceful silence between them. Just then, the old wooden door of the lighthouse opened slowly. An elderly woman stepped outside. She wore a soft blue sweater and a wide straw hat that moved gently in the breeze. Her silver hair caught the morning sunlight. She smiled kindly when she saw Ethan. "Good morning," she said in a calm and welcoming voice. "I've been hoping someone would come to enjoy this beautiful morning." Ethan smiled and returned the greeting. Somehow, just like the hidden cabin beside the whispering river, this quiet lighthouse already felt like another place where a beautiful story was waiting to begin. Episode 3, The Secret Lighthouse by the Silent Sea. Part 3. The elderly woman smiled warmly as Ethan walked closer to the lighthouse. The gentle sea breeze lifted the edge of her blue sweater. Behind her, the endless ocean shimmered beneath the golden morning sun. "I'm Margaret," she said softly. "I've been taking care of this lighthouse for many years." Ethan smiled. "My name is Ethan." Margaret nodded kindly. "Welcome, Ethan. The sea always seems to send kind visitors when the morning is this peaceful." Ethan looked up at the tall white lighthouse. It seemed even taller now that he was standing beside it. Its white walls carried the marks of many seasons. Summer sunshine, autumn winds, winter storms, spring rain. Yet it stood quietly and proudly, watching over the sea. Margaret noticed Ethan's curious eyes. "Would you like to see the lighthouse from the inside?" Ethan's face brightened. "I would love to." Margaret opened the heavy wooden door. It creaked softly as it swung inward. Inside, the lighthouse felt cool and peaceful. The stone walls were thick. The air carried the faint scent of old wood, sea salt, and polished brass. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, creating warm patterns across the wooden floor. A beautiful spiral staircase wound upward through the center of the tower. Its smooth wooden steps had been polished by countless footsteps over the years. Margaret placed one hand on the railing. "We'll climb slowly," she said. "The lighthouse has waited here for over 100 years. It won't mind waiting a few more minutes." Ethan smiled. Together, they began climbing. Step by step, the staircase curved gently upward. As they climbed higher, small round windows offered peaceful views of the coastline. From one window, Ethan saw waves rolling gently against the rocky shore. From another, he watched a small fishing boat moving quietly across the calm sea. White seagulls circled effortlessly above the water. Everything moved slowly. Everything felt calm. Halfway up the tower, Margaret stopped beside an old wooden shelf. On it rested a collection of seashells gathered over many years. Some were smooth and white. Others carried gentle shades of pink and pale blue. Each shell was different. Margaret picked up one small spiral shell. "When I was young," she said, "I believed every shell held a story." She handed it carefully to Ethan. "Now, I think every shell simply reminds us to listen." Ethan held the shell close to his ear. Once again, he heard the soft whisper that sounded almost like distant waves. Whether it was truly the sea, or only his imagination, he couldn't tell. But somehow, it made him smile. They continued climbing. The staircase became brighter as they neared the top. Warm sunlight poured through the windows. The sound of the wind became clearer, gentle, steady, peaceful. Finally, they reached the lantern room. The great glass windows surrounded them on every side. Before Ethan stretched the most beautiful view he had ever seen. The endless blue ocean reached all the way to the horizon. The waves sparkled like thousands of tiny diamonds beneath the morning sun. Far below, the cliffs stood strong against the gentle sea. The world looked peaceful from above. Margaret rested her hand on the polished brass railing. "This," she whispered, "is my favorite room in the whole lighthouse." Ethan nodded slowly. He understood. Sometimes, the highest places weren't meant to make us feel big. They were meant to remind us how beautifully vast the world could be. They stood together in quiet silence, listening to the wind, watching the sea, and letting the peaceful morning fill their hearts. Episode 3, The Secret Lighthouse by the Silent Sea. Part 4. The morning sunlight poured gently through the crystal-clear windows of the lantern room. The sea stretched endlessly in every direction. Its calm blue surface shimmered beneath the rising sun. Gentle waves rolled toward the shore, one after another, never rushing. Ethan stood quietly beside the great glass windows. He rested one hand on the polished brass railing. A cool sea breeze drifted through a small open window, carrying the fresh scent of salt and sea air. Far below, white seagulls floated gracefully above the waves. Some glided silently with their wings stretched wide. Others landed softly upon the water before rising into the sky once again. Margaret smiled. "When I first came here," she said softly, "I thought my job was to care for the lighthouse." She paused for a moment, but after many years, I realized the lighthouse was quietly taking care of me. Ethan looked at her with gentle curiosity. "What do you mean?" Margaret walked slowly toward the large lantern that stood in the center of the room. Its enormous glass panels sparkled in the sunlight. Inside rested the powerful light that guided ships safely through the night. She gently touched the smooth brass frame. There were days when life felt confusing. There were days when I felt lonely. But every evening, I climbed these same stairs. I lit this lantern, and I watched its light travel across the sea. She smiled warmly. The lighthouse reminded me that even a small light can help someone far away. Ethan looked through the window once more. Far on the horizon, he noticed a tiny white sailboat moving peacefully across the water. It looked so small against the endless ocean, yet the lighthouse stood tall, quietly watching over it. Margaret opened a small wooden cabinet beside the lantern. Inside were old journals, carefully arranged in neat rows. Some were faded with age. Others looked almost new. She selected one with a deep green cover. "I've written here for many years," she said. "Not about storms, not about difficult days, but about beautiful mornings like this one." She opened the journal carefully. Pressed between the pages were tiny dried sea flowers, delicate feathers from seagulls, and small sketches of the lighthouse. One page showed a simple drawing of the sunrise over the sea. Another held a tiny pressed piece of sea lavender. Margaret smiled. Beautiful memories deserve a safe place to rest. Ethan thought about the notebook inside his backpack. He remembered the smooth river stones Samuel had given him. Now he understood. Every peaceful journey left behind a quiet treasure. Sometimes it was a stone, sometimes a shell, sometimes only a memory. Outside, the breeze became a little stronger. The lighthouse gave a soft, gentle hum as the wind moved around its tall walls. It was a calm sound, steady, comforting. Margaret looked toward the horizon. The sea is changing. Ethan followed her gaze. Far in the distance, a thin blanket of white mist was slowly drifting across the water. It moved gently, almost like a cloud floating upon the ocean. "The morning fog is coming," Margaret whispered. "It's one of the most peaceful sights you'll ever see." Together, they stood quietly beside the great lantern, watching the mist slowly embrace the sea, listening to the gentle rhythm of the waves below, and feeling grateful for another quiet morning. At the secret lighthouse by the silent sea. Episode 3. The Secret Lighthouse by the Silent Sea. Part 5. The morning mist drifted slowly across the sea. It moved so gently that it almost seemed to float rather than travel. The distant horizon slowly disappeared behind a soft white curtain. The waves continued their peaceful rhythm below the cliffs. Wash, pause, wash, pause. Margaret stood quietly beside the great lantern. She watched the mist with a calm smile. "Many people think fog hides the world," she said softly. "But sometimes, it simply asks us to slow down." Ethan nodded. The sea looked completely different now. A few minutes earlier, he could see for miles. Now, only the nearby water remained visible. Yet somehow, it felt even more peaceful. Margaret carefully climbed a small set of steps leading to the lantern. She gently polished one of its large glass panels with a soft cotton cloth. Every movement was slow, careful, almost like a quiet morning ritual. "I still clean the lantern every day," she said. "Even when no ships are expected." Ethan looked curious. "Why?" Margaret smiled. "Because kindness isn't something we do only when someone is watching. We do it because it becomes part of who we are." Her words stayed quietly in Ethan's heart. Outside, the cry of a single seagull echoed through the mist. Its sound drifted across the water before fading into silence. Margaret opened a small wooden chest beneath the lantern. Inside lay several old navigation tools, a polished brass compass, a weathered telescope, a folded sea chart with carefully drawn coastlines. She handed the telescope to Ethan. "Take a look." Ethan lifted it carefully to his eye. At first, he saw only white mist. Then, very slowly, a small fishing boat appeared. It floated peacefully through the calm water. The fisherman wasn't rushing. He simply allowed the gentle waves to guide his little boat. "It's beautiful," Ethan whispered. Margaret nodded. "The sea teaches patience. No wave arrives before its time, and none stay forever." Ethan lowered the telescope. The words reminded him of Samuel beside the whispering river. Different places, different people, yet somehow the same gentle lessons. The lighthouse, the river, the forest, the sea. Each one quietly reminded people to breathe, to slow down, and to notice the beauty around them. As the morning continued, the mist slowly began to lift. Golden sunlight returned to the water. Tiny diamonds of light danced across every wave. The cliffs below glowed warmly beneath the morning sun. Margaret looked toward the winding staircase. "I know another peaceful place," she said with a gentle smile. "It's just behind the lighthouse. Very few visitors ever find it." Ethan's eyes brightened. He smiled quietly. Every peaceful journey seemed to reveal another hidden treasure. Together, they began walking down the spiral staircase. Step by step, the lighthouse remained calm behind them. The waves continued their endless song, and somewhere beyond the garden, another quiet adventure was waiting beside the sea. Episode 3, The Secret Lighthouse by the Silent Sea. Part 6. The spiral staircase echoed softly beneath their footsteps. Step, step, step. The sound blended gently with the distant rhythm of the sea. When they reached the bottom of the lighthouse, Margaret opened a small wooden gate hidden behind a wall of climbing roses. The gate creaked quietly. Beyond it was a narrow stone path that Ethan had not noticed before. The path curved gently around the back of the lighthouse, where the sea breeze carried the sweet fragrance of wildflowers growing among the cliffs. Tiny white daisies, purple sea lavender, and bright yellow buttercups swayed together in the wind. Butterflies floated lazily from flower to flower. Bees hummed softly as they gathered nectar. Everything moved with a peaceful rhythm. After a short walk, the path opened into a small hidden garden. It was surrounded by smooth white stones and low wooden fences. At the center stood an old wooden bench facing the ocean. Beside the bench grew a single cherry tree. Its branches stretched gently over the garden, offering cool shade beneath the morning sun. Tiny pink blossoms drifted slowly through the air whenever the breeze passed by. Some petals landed upon the grass. Others floated toward the cliffs before disappearing into the sea. Ethan stopped walking. "This place is beautiful," he whispered. Margaret smiled. "It has always been my favorite corner of the lighthouse. When life feels busy, I come here. I sit on this bench, and I simply watch the sea breathe." They sat together. The wooden bench was warmed by the gentle morning sunlight. The waves rolled quietly below the cliffs. The breeze moved softly through the cherry blossoms. No one hurried. No one spoke. The silence itself felt comforting. After a few peaceful minutes, Margaret pointed toward a small wooden birdhouse hanging from the cherry tree. Almost immediately, a tiny bluebird landed on its roof. It looked around for a moment before singing a gentle morning song. Another bird soon joined it. Their melodies floated through the garden like a quiet lullaby. Margaret smiled. "They visit every morning. I never feed them. I simply share this peaceful place with them." Ethan watched the little birds. They seemed completely at ease. One bird flew down to the grass. picked up a tiny seed, then returned to the branch. The other continued singing softly. The garden felt alive, yet wonderfully calm. Margaret reached into a small wicker basket beside the bench. Inside were 2 warm blueberry muffins wrapped in a clean white cloth. She handed one to Ethan. "I baked these before sunrise." Ethan smiled. The muffin was still slightly warm. It tasted of fresh blueberries, honey, and a hint of cinnamon. They ate slowly, watching the sunlight sparkle across the sea. Nearby, a family of rabbits emerged carefully from the tall grass. The smallest rabbit paused to nibble on a clover flower. Then, one by one, they disappeared quietly into the meadow beyond the garden. Margaret laughed softly. They've been visiting for years. I think they believe this garden belongs to them. Ethan laughed quietly too. Perhaps they were right. The garden did not belong to people. It belonged to peace itself. As the morning breeze grew a little warmer, Margaret stood and brushed a few cherry blossoms from her sweater. "There is one last place I'd like to show you today," she said. "It's where I go whenever I want to watch the sunset." Ethan looked toward the winding path leading farther along the cliffs. With quiet excitement, he followed Margaret once again. The sea whispered below. The blossoms danced in the breeze. And another beautiful chapter of the journey quietly began. Episode 3, The Secret Lighthouse by the Silent Sea. Part 7. Margaret and Ethan followed the narrow path that curved gently along the edge of the cliffs. The sea stretched endlessly beside them. Its calm blue waters sparkled beneath the late morning sun. A cool breeze drifted in from the ocean, carrying the fresh scent of salt and seagrass. The sound of the waves remained steady. Wash, pause, wash, pause. Each wave seemed to arrive exactly when it was meant to. Nothing hurried, nothing delayed. The path became narrower as they walked. Wildflowers grew between the rocks. Soft purple sea lavender, tiny white daisies, golden buttercups dancing in the breeze. Butterflies floated quietly among the flowers. A pair of seagulls rested peacefully on a nearby rock, watching the gentle sea below. After several peaceful minutes, Margaret stopped beside a weathered wooden sign. The faded letters read, "Sunset Point." She smiled. "This is where I come almost every evening." Ethan looked ahead. The path opened onto a wide cliff overlooking the endless ocean. Near the edge stood a single old wooden bench. Its surface had been smoothed by years of sea wind and sunshine. Behind it stood a lone wind-shaped pine tree. Its branches leaned gently toward the sea, as though listening to the waves below. Margaret walked to the bench and sat down. Ethan joined her. For a while, they simply watched the ocean. Far below, gentle waves rolled against the rocks, creating tiny white circles of foam before quietly disappearing. A small sailboat drifted peacefully across the horizon. Its white sail caught the sunlight, glowing softly against the blue sky. Margaret broke the silence. Every sunset is different, and that's what makes each one special. No two evenings are ever exactly the same. Ethan nodded slowly. He liked that thought. Life didn't have to repeat itself perfectly to be beautiful. The breeze became a little stronger. The pine tree swayed gently above them. Its needles whispered softly together. The sound blended with the sea until it became impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. Margaret reached into her pocket and removed a tiny polished piece of sea glass. It shimmered in shades of pale blue and green. "The ocean gave this to me many years ago," she said. "It began as an ordinary piece of broken glass. But after years of gentle waves, it became something beautiful." She placed the sea glass into Ethan's hand. Its surface was perfectly smooth, cool to the touch. He turned it slowly in the sunlight. Tiny colors danced inside it. Margaret smiled. "The sea reminds us that even difficult experiences can become beautiful with time." Ethan carefully slipped the little piece of sea glass into his backpack beside Samuel's 3 river stones and his notebook. Each journey was giving him a new treasure, not because it was valuable, but because it carried a peaceful memory. Above them, fluffy white clouds drifted slowly across the sky. The afternoon sun became softer. Golden light spread across the water like a shimmering path leading toward the horizon. Margaret looked toward the west. "We still have a little time before sunset. There's one more quiet place hidden below these cliffs. A tiny beach that most people never notice." Ethan smiled with quiet excitement. Another hidden place. Another peaceful story waiting to be discovered. Together, they rose from the old wooden bench. The sea breeze gently followed them. The lighthouse stood proudly in the distance, and the endless ocean continued its calm, timeless song. Episode 3, The Secret Lighthouse by the Silent Sea. Part 8. Margaret led Ethan along a narrow trail that wound gently down the side of the cliff. The path was lined with smooth gray stones, polished by years of wind and rain. Wild grasses swayed softly in the sea breeze. Tiny blue flowers peeked out between the rocks. The sound of the waves grew a little louder with every step. Not loud enough to disturb the silence, only close enough to remind them that the sea was waiting below. Soon, the trail opened onto a hidden beach. It was small, quiet, almost completely hidden between 2 tall cliffs. The sand was soft and golden, untouched except for a few tiny bird footprints. Gentle waves rolled onto the shore before slipping quietly back into the sea. Wash, pause, wash, pause. The rhythm felt almost like slow breathing. Ethan smiled. "I've never seen a beach this peaceful." Margaret nodded. "Very few people know it's here, and those who do usually keep it a secret." She removed her shoes and stepped onto the cool sand. Ethan did the same. The sand felt soft beneath his feet. The gentle water reached his toes before quietly retreating again. It was cool, refreshing, comforting. Along the shoreline, hundreds of tiny seashells rested like little treasures. Some were white, some pale pink. Others carried delicate shades of lavender and cream. Each one had been shaped patiently by the sea. Ethan knelt beside the water. He carefully picked up a small spiral shell. Its surface shimmered gently in the sunlight. "It looks perfect," he whispered. Margaret smiled. "The sea teaches us that beauty often comes through patience." They continued walking slowly along the shore. Above them, the cliffs protected the little beach from the stronger winds. Everything felt sheltered, safe, peaceful. A group of tiny sandpipers hurried along the edge of the water. Their little feet moved quickly across the wet sand as they searched for tiny shells. Then, all together, they lifted into the air. Their wings flashed silver in the sunlight before they disappeared along the coastline. Ethan watched them until they became tiny dots against the sky. The sea breeze carried the fresh scent of salt and seaweed. Somewhere beyond the cliffs, a lighthouse bell rang softly. One gentle chime, then silence. Margaret closed her eyes. I love that sound. It reminds me that no matter where I am, the lighthouse is always there. They found a smooth driftwood log resting on the sand. Together they sat quietly. The waves continued their endless conversation with the shore. The afternoon sunlight reflected across the water like scattered pieces of gold. A playful dolphin suddenly appeared beyond the gentle waves. It leaped gracefully above the surface before disappearing beneath the sea again. A few moments later, another dolphin followed, then another. Ethan's eyes widened with wonder. They're beautiful. Margaret laughed softly. They visit this bay almost every afternoon. They've been coming here for as long as I can remember. The dolphins swam peacefully through the calm water before slowly disappearing toward the open sea. Silence returned once again, the kind of silence that made every breath feel deeper, every heartbeat slower. Margaret looked toward the western sky. The sunlight had begun to soften. The evening is almost here, she said quietly. And tonight, I think you'll see the most beautiful sunset this lighthouse has ever shared. Ethan smiled. He stood, brushed the soft sand from his shoes, and took one last look at the hidden beach. Already, it had become another peaceful memory he knew he would carry forever. Together, they followed the winding path back toward the cliffs, where the golden evening light was waiting. Episode 3, The Secret Lighthouse by the Silent Sea. Part 10. The last golden glow of the sunset slowly faded beyond the horizon. Twilight gently wrapped the coastline in shades of deep blue and soft violet. The sea became calm and glass-like, reflecting the first stars of the evening. Margaret and Ethan walked slowly toward the lighthouse. The narrow stone path was quiet beneath their feet. Tiny lanterns placed along the garden path began to glow with a warm amber light. The flowers swayed gently in the cool sea breeze. The lighthouse stood silently above them, waiting for another peaceful night. As they reached the entrance, Margaret looked up toward the lantern room. It's time, she whispered. The sea is growing dark. Together, they climbed the spiral staircase once again. Step, step, step. The sound echoed softly inside the tall stone tower. When they reached the top, the lantern room was bathed in the last light of dusk. The great brass lantern stood quietly in the center. Its crystal glass reflected the soft colors of the evening sky. Margaret carefully unlocked a small brass panel. She gently adjusted the polished mechanism inside. Every movement was slow, patient, respectful. This lighthouse has welcomed sailors home for more than a century, she said softly. It deserves to be treated with kindness. Ethan watched with quiet fascination. Margaret reached for a small switch. With a gentle click, the great light awakened. At first, it glowed softly, then brighter, and brighter still. Soon, a brilliant beam of warm white light stretched across the darkening sea. Slowly, the lantern began to turn. The light swept gracefully across the ocean, round and round, again and again. Far below, the gentle waves sparkled each time the beam touched them. The cliffs glowed for a brief moment before returning to shadow. The sea looked endless beneath the starlit sky. Ethan stood beside the window in complete silence. Watching the light circle across the horizon felt strangely comforting. It reminded him of the river, always moving, always faithful, always there. Margaret smiled. Every few seconds, someone far away may see this light. They may never know my name, but they'll know they're safe. Ethan looked toward the distant horizon. Tiny lights from fishing boats flickered peacefully across the sea. Each one seemed to answer the lighthouse with its own gentle glow. The night breeze drifted through the open window. It carried the fresh scent of salt water and the distant sound of waves rolling against the shore. The lighthouse hummed quietly as its great lantern continued its endless circle. Outside, the stars multiplied across the sky. The Milky Way stretched above the ocean like a river of silver light. A shooting star crossed the heavens for a brief, beautiful moment. Ethan smiled. He closed his eyes. He listened. The waves, the wind, the quiet turning of the lighthouse lantern, the distant calls of seabirds settling for the night. Everything blended into one peaceful melody. Margaret spoke almost in a whisper. People believe the lighthouse guides ships. She looked at Ethan with a gentle smile. But sometimes, I think it guides hearts as well. Ethan nodded slowly. He understood exactly what she meant. Some places did more than show the way. They reminded us how to slow down, how to breathe, and how to find peace within ourselves. The lighthouse continued sending its gentle light across the silent sea, while the peaceful night quietly embraced the world. Episode 3, The Secret Lighthouse by the Silent Sea. Part 11. The lighthouse continued its slow, graceful rotation. Its brilliant beams swept across the silent sea. Once, then again, never rushing. Outside, the night had settled completely over the coastline. The stars shimmered above the ocean like tiny diamonds scattered across a velvet sky. Ethan stood quietly beside the tall window. The cool glass rested beneath his fingertips. Far below, the waves continued their endless conversation with the shore. Wash, pause, wash, pause. The rhythm felt timeless. Margaret carefully closed the small brass panel beneath the great lantern. She smiled with quiet satisfaction. "The light will watch over the sea until sunrise," she said softly. "It never grows tired. It simply keeps shining." Ethan looked toward the distant horizon. Tiny fishing boats floated peacefully upon the dark water. Each carried a single warm lantern. From high above, they looked like little golden stars resting upon the sea. "They're beautiful," Ethan whispered. Margaret nodded. "My father used to say, no light is too small if it helps someone find their way." For a long while, neither of them spoke. The silence felt warm, comfortable, the kind of silence shared between old friends. After a few peaceful minutes, Margaret reached into a small wooden cabinet near the window. She removed a thick leather-bound book. Its cover had faded with age. The corners were smooth from many years of careful hands. She placed it gently on a wooden table. "This is our lighthouse journal," she explained. "It has been here for generations." Ethan opened it carefully. The pages were filled with beautiful handwriting. Some entries described calm mornings. Others told of colorful sunsets. Many spoke of peaceful nights exactly like this one. There were no stories of fear, no stories of storms, only quiet memories, simple moments, beautiful days. Margaret smiled. "I believe peaceful memories deserve to be written down. They become little lights for the future." She handed Ethan a fountain pen. "Would you like to write something?" Ethan thought for a moment. Then he carefully wrote, "Asterisk, tonight I learned that the brightest lights are often the quietest ones. The sea whispers, the lighthouse listens, and peaceful hearts always find their way home." Asterisk. Margaret read the words with a gentle smile. "I think the lighthouse will remember you." She carefully closed the journal and returned it to its shelf. Outside, the wind softened even more. The ocean became almost perfectly still. The lighthouse beam continued its graceful circle across the sleeping sea. Suddenly, a tiny family of dolphins appeared once again. Their smooth backs shimmered silver beneath the moonlight. They rose gently from the water, then disappeared beneath the waves. A few moments later, they returned, playing quietly in the calm sea. Ethan watched with wonder. They even visit at night. Margaret laughed softly. The sea has many gentle surprises. You only have to be patient enough to notice them. The moon climbed higher into the sky. Its reflection stretched across the water like a long ribbon of silver leading toward the horizon. The lighthouse light crossed it again and again. Silver, then white, then silver once more. Ethan closed his eyes. He listened to every peaceful sound. The waves, the wind, the turning lantern, the distant dolphins. His breathing became slower. His thoughts became quieter. And in that peaceful moment, he realized that sometimes the greatest gift a place can offer is not excitement. It is stillness. Episode 3, The Secret Lighthouse by the Silent Sea. Part 12. The lighthouse stood quietly beneath the moonlit sky. Its gentle beam continued its endless circle across the peaceful sea. Round and round, never stopping, never hurrying. The sound of the waves below had become softer than ever. The tide was slowly rising. Each wave rolled gently onto the shore before slipping back into the endless ocean. Wash, pause, wash, pause. Margaret opened one of the tall lantern room windows just a little wider. A cool night breeze drifted inside. It carried the refreshing scent of sea salt, fresh air, and blooming sea lavender from the cliffs below. Ethan closed his eyes and took a slow breath. The night air felt wonderfully calm, almost magical. Margaret smiled gently. "Every night," she whispered, "I spend a few quiet minutes simply listening, not thinking, not worrying, just listening." Ethan stood beside her. Together, they listened. The turning lantern, the gentle wind, the distant waves, the occasional call of a seabird gliding through the darkness. Each sound arrived softly, then faded naturally into silence. Far across the sea, the moonlight painted a silver path upon the water. It stretched from the horizon all the way to the cliffs below the lighthouse. "It almost looks like a road," Ethan whispered. Margaret nodded. "My grandmother used to call it the moon's path. She believed every peaceful dream traveled across that silver light." Ethan smiled. He imagined thousands of gentle dreams floating across the quiet sea beneath the moon. Some carried hope, some carried memories, others simply carried peace. The lighthouse continued shining faithfully. Its beams swept across the silver water, touching the distant fishing boats one by one. Each boat answered with a tiny golden light of its own. The sea felt alive, not with noise, but with kindness. Margaret quietly opened another small wooden drawer. Inside rested an old music box carved with tiny seashells and waves. She wound it carefully. A soft melody filled the lantern room. The tune was slow, peaceful, almost like the rhythm of the ocean itself. The music blended perfectly with the waves outside. For a few magical moments, it became impossible to tell where the melody ended and where the sea began. Ethan rested comfortably in a wooden chair beside the great lantern. The warm light reflected softly across the polished floor. The music, the wind, the waves, everything worked together like one gentle lullaby. His eyelids became a little heavier. His breathing slowed. Margaret noticed and smiled. The lighthouse has a special way of helping tired hearts rest. She placed a warm wool blanket across Ethan's shoulders. It has been doing that for generations. Outside, a family of seals rested quietly on the rocks below. Now and then, one would gently lift its head before settling peacefully once again. Above them, countless stars shimmered across the clear night sky. The Milky Way stretched from one horizon to the other. It looked like a quiet river flowing through the heavens. Ethan gazed upward. He thought of Samuel beside the whispering river, his grandmother at the farmhouse, and now Margaret at the lighthouse. Different places, different people, yet every one of them had shared the same simple lesson. Slow down, breathe deeply, and never forget to notice the quiet beauty that surrounds you. Margaret gently looked toward the eastern sky. In a few hours, the first light of morning will return, and the lighthouse will welcome another peaceful day. Ethan smiled softly. He knew that when sunrise arrived, the sea would have another beautiful story to tell. Episode 3, The Secret Lighthouse by the Silent Sea. Part 13. The peaceful melody of the little music box slowly faded into silence. Only the sound of the waves remained. Wash, pause, wash, pause. The lighthouse beam continued its gentle circle across the quiet sea. Outside, the moon had climbed high above the ocean. Its silver light bathed the cliffs, the flowers, and the old lighthouse in a soft glow. Ethan wrapped the warm blanket a little closer around his shoulders. The chair beside the lantern felt comfortable. The room itself seemed to breathe with the rhythm of the sea. Margaret quietly walked to a small round table near the window. She lit a tiny beeswax candle. Its warm golden flame flickered gently, not because it was needed. The lighthouse already provided plenty of light, but because Margaret believed every evening deserved a small moment of warmth. My mother lit a candle every night, she said softly. She used to say, asterisk, a little light reminds us that peace always has a home. Asterisk. Ethan watched the tiny flame dance. It was small, simple, yet somehow it made the room feel even more welcoming. Margaret opened a wooden cupboard and brought out 2 small bowls. Inside were warm oatmeal cookies she had baked that morning. The sweet aroma of honey, cinnamon, and vanilla filled the room. She handed one bowl to Ethan. They ate slowly, enjoying the quiet evening. Outside, the sea breeze gently touched the lighthouse windows. Somewhere below, a wave splashed softly against the rocks. The sound echoed gently through the night. After a while, Margaret walked to the window and pointed toward the northern sky. Look carefully. Ethan followed her gaze. Above the ocean stretched thousands of stars, but one group shone brighter than the others. They've helped sailors find their way home for hundreds of years, Margaret whispered. My grandfather taught me to look for them whenever I felt lost. Ethan smiled. Samuel had once shown him the same stars beside the whispering river. It made him realize something beautiful. No matter where we travel, the same sky watches over us all. The same stars shine above every peaceful place. The thought made him feel calm, connected, at home. A gentle fog began rising from the sea once again. It drifted slowly between the cliffs like soft white clouds. The lighthouse beam passed through it gracefully. Each sweep of light created glowing silver ribbons across the mist. It looked almost magical. Margaret smiled. The sea likes to keep a few secrets, but it always shares enough beauty for those who wait. Ethan rested his head against the back of the chair. His eyelids felt pleasantly heavy, not from tiredness alone, but from peace. The kind of peace that asks nothing from you except to be present. The candle continued burning quietly. The lantern kept turning. The waves never stopped singing. And somewhere in the distance, a lonely sailboat crossed the moonlit sea, guided safely by the faithful lighthouse. Margaret looked at Ethan and smiled gently. Tomorrow morning, I'll show you something very few people have ever seen. A place where the sea greets the very first sunlight. Ethan's eyes sparkled with quiet curiosity. He knew another peaceful adventure was waiting with the dawn. But for now, the lighthouse, the sea, and the endless stars were more than enough. Episode 3, The Secret Lighthouse by the Silent Sea. Part 14. The night grew quieter with every passing hour. The little beeswax candle continued to glow softly upon the wooden table. Its tiny flame danced gently whenever the sea breeze drifted through the open window. Outside, the lighthouse beam continued its faithful journey across the ocean. Round and round, again and again, the sea answered with its own peaceful rhythm. Wash, pause, wash, pause. Ethan slowly stood and walked toward the wide glass window. The moon was now high above the water. Its silver light stretched across the sea like a beautiful pathway leading into the distance. Margaret joined him quietly. "When I first saw this view," she whispered, "I thought it would become ordinary one day." She smiled softly, but it never did. The sea always finds a new way to be beautiful. Ethan nodded. Tonight, the ocean looked different from earlier. The gentle mist had almost disappeared. The stars reflected clearly upon the calm water. It felt as though the sky and the sea had quietly become one. Margaret opened a small wooden chest beside the window. Inside were dozens of postcards collected over many years. Each one showed the lighthouse during a different season. Spring flowers blooming along the cliffs. Golden summer sunsets. Autumn skies painted with crimson clouds. Winter mornings covered in soft frost. She handed one postcard to Ethan. It showed the lighthouse standing proudly beneath thousands of stars. On the back was a handwritten sentence. Asterisk, peace is not a place you find. It is a feeling you carry. Asterisk. Ethan read the words twice, then smiled. He carefully placed the postcard inside his notebook. It would remind him of this quiet evening whenever he returned home. Margaret poured 2 cups of warm lavender tea. The gentle aroma filled the lantern room. They sat beside the window, sipping slowly. The tea was warm. The night air was cool. Together, they created the perfect balance. Far below, a family of seals rested peacefully upon the rocks. One small seal lifted its head toward the lighthouse. then settled comfortably beside its mother once again. High above, an owl glided silently past the tower before disappearing into the darkness. Everything moved gently. Everything belonged. Margaret spoke again. Many visitors ask me if I ever become lonely here. She looked out across the sea. I always smile, because how can anyone feel lonely when they're surrounded by the wind, the waves, the stars, and peaceful memories? Ethan understood. True companionship was not always found in crowded places. Sometimes it was found in quiet moments shared with nature. The lighthouse lantern completed another slow circle. Its warm light touched the sea, the cliffs, the distant boats, and finally returned to the tower once more. Margaret stood and gently closed the music box. The night is becoming very late. We should rest. She led Ethan down the spiral staircase. Step, step, step. The lower room of the lighthouse felt wonderfully cozy. A small fireplace glowed softly. Beside it stood a neatly made bed with a thick quilt stitched in shades of blue and white. The blanket smelled faintly of lavender and fresh cotton. Margaret smiled. Tomorrow, we'll wake before sunrise. The sea has one final gift waiting for you. Ethan climbed beneath the warm quilt. Through the small bedroom window, he could still see the lighthouse beam sweeping quietly across the night. His breathing became slower. His thoughts became lighter. The waves continued their endless lullaby. The wind whispered softly around the lighthouse walls. And somewhere beyond the horizon, morning was already preparing its first golden light. Episode 3, The Secret Lighthouse by the Silent Sea. Part 15. The lighthouse rested peacefully beneath the star-filled sky. Outside, the great lantern continued its slow, graceful journey across the sea. Its warm beam reached far into the darkness, guiding quiet fishing boats, touching gentle waves, and returning home once again. Inside the cozy bedroom, Ethan slept deeply beneath the thick quilt. The soft sound of the ocean drifted through the slightly open window. Wash, pause, wash, pause. Every wave seemed to whisper a gentle lullaby. The breeze carried the calming scent of sea salt and lavender into the room. The little fireplace had burned down to glowing embers. Its gentle orange light flickered softly across the wooden walls. The room felt warm, safe, peaceful. Hours passed quietly. The moon slowly began its journey toward the western horizon. Outside, the stars seemed brighter than ever. The Milky Way stretched across the heavens like a silver river flowing through the night. Just before dawn, Margaret quietly opened the bedroom door. She carried a small oil lantern. Its golden light barely disturbed the peaceful darkness. She smiled gently. "Good morning, Ethan. It's almost time." Ethan slowly opened his eyes. For a moment, he simply listened. The waves, the wind, the distant cry of a single seagull welcoming the new day. Everything felt wonderfully calm. He wrapped a warm wool sweater around his shoulders and followed Margaret upstairs. Together they climbed the familiar spiral staircase. Step, step, step. When they reached the lantern room, the sky was still deep blue. The stars had not yet disappeared, but along the eastern horizon, a thin line of pale golden light had begun to appear. Margaret opened the balcony door. A cool morning breeze greeted them. They stepped outside. The lighthouse balcony circled the very top of the tower. From there, The entire coastline stretched endlessly in every direction. The sea was almost perfectly still. Not a single fishing boat disturbed its calm surface. The world seemed to be waiting quietly for the sunrise. Neither Ethan nor Margaret spoke. They simply stood together, breathing slowly, watching the horizon brighten little by little. Soft pink, golden orange, gentle lavender. The colors blended beautifully across the morning sky. Far below, the waves reflected every shade like a moving painting. A small group of dolphins appeared once again. They swam gracefully through the calm water. One by one, they rose above the surface before disappearing beneath the sea. Their movements were slow, elegant, peaceful. Margaret smiled. They always arrived before sunrise. I've never known them to miss a morning. Above them, several seagulls glided silently through the cool air. They floated effortlessly upon the gentle breeze. No rushing, no struggle, only trust in the wind. Ethan rested both hands upon the cool brass railing. He took a deep breath. The fresh ocean air filled his lungs. He felt lighter than he had in a long time. The quiet lighthouse, the endless sea, the peaceful night had gently changed something inside him. He could not explain it, but he could feel it, and somehow he knew he would carry this peaceful feeling with him, wherever life would lead. Just then, the very first golden edge of the sun slowly rose above the distant horizon. The entire ocean shimmered with light. A new day had begun. Episode 3, The Secret Lighthouse by the Silent Sea. Part 16, Final. The first golden rays of the sun slowly rose above the endless ocean. The sky blossomed into soft shades of gold, peach, and gentle pink. Every wave reflected the morning light like thousands of tiny sparkling diamonds. The world seemed to awaken in complete peace. Ethan and Margaret stood side by side on the lighthouse balcony. Neither of them spoke. The sunrise itself told the story. The cool sea breeze gently moved through their hair. Below, the waves rolled quietly toward the shore. Wash, pause, wash, pause. The rhythm felt familiar now, almost like the heartbeat of the sea itself. As the sun climbed higher, the lighthouse lantern slowly became dimmer. Its work for the night was complete. Margaret smiled warmly. Every lighthouse knows when it's time to rest, and every sunrise reminds us that a new beginning is always waiting. Ethan nodded. He looked across the bright ocean one last time. The dolphins had disappeared into the deep blue water. The seagulls soared gracefully above the cliffs. Far away, a small fishing boat sailed peacefully toward the open sea. Everything moved gently. Everything belonged. They walked back down the spiral staircase together. Step, step, step. Inside the lighthouse kitchen, Margaret prepared a simple breakfast. Fresh bread still warm from the oven. Golden honey gathered from nearby wildflowers. Creamy butter. Slices of sweet apples and pears. And 2 cups of warm chamomile tea. The aroma filled the little room with comfort. They ate slowly by the window while watching the sunlight dance upon the sea. When breakfast was finished, Margaret disappeared for a moment into a small storage room. She returned carrying a tiny wooden box. The box was smooth and beautifully carved with waves, seashells, and a lighthouse. She handed it gently to Ethan. A little memory, she said. Ethan opened it carefully. Inside rested 3 treasures. A smooth white seashell, a piece of pale blue sea glass, and a tiny brass compass no larger than a coin. Margaret smiled. The seashell will remind you to listen. The sea glass will remind you that time can turn broken things into something beautiful. And the compass, she gently closed Ethan's fingers around it, will remind you that your heart already knows the way home. Ethan placed the little treasures safely into his backpack beside Samuel's river stones and his notebook. His collection of peaceful memories was growing. But more importantly, his heart was growing too. Soon it was time to leave. Together they walked to the narrow stone path leading away from the lighthouse. Wildflowers danced gently in the morning breeze. The cherry tree behind the lighthouse released a few final blossoms into the air. They floated softly toward the sea. Margaret stopped beside the old blue door. "If life ever feels noisy," she said quietly, "remember the sound of the waves. If your heart ever feels heavy, remember the light of the lighthouse. And if you ever forget how peaceful the world can be, come back. The sea will always welcome you." Ethan smiled with gratitude. "I will." They shared a warm goodbye. Then Ethan began walking along the winding coastal path. After a short distance, he paused and looked back one final time. The tall white lighthouse stood proudly against the bright blue sky. Margaret stood beside the doorway, waving gently. The morning sunlight wrapped the lighthouse in a golden glow. It looked less like a building and more like a quiet promise. A promise that hope, kindness, and peace would always remain. As Ethan continued his journey home, he reached into his backpack and touched the little compass. He smiled, not because he needed directions, but because he had discovered something far more important. The most beautiful places in the world do not simply change the landscapes we see. They gently change the way we see ourselves. And as the sound of the sea slowly faded behind him, its peaceful rhythm remained forever inside his heart.